As long as he was hanging around, I said, the price of meat has just gone up, and your old lady has just gone down.
Frank Zappa was born on December 21st, 1940, in Baltimore, Maryland. His mother, Rosemarie Collimore, and his father, Francis Vincent Zappa, were Sicilian. Growing up as the oldest of 4 kids in an Italian-American household, Frank Zappa was exposed to Italian language and culture, particularly from his grandparents. His dad's profession as a chemist and mathematician in the defense industry meant that the family moved frequently. The family had lived in Florida during the 40s, but they eventually returned to Maryland. There, Francis Zappa worked at the Edgewood Arsenal Chemical Warfare Facility of the Aberdeen Proving Ground, operated by the U.S. Army. The family's proximity to the arsenal, which stored hazardous materials like mustard gas, necessitated keeping gas masks at home as a precaution against potential accidents. This unique and somewhat unsettling aspect of Frank's childhood had a profound impact on him. It's reflected in his work, where themes such as germs, germ warfare, ailments, and the defense industry frequently appear. This background contributed to the distinctive and often avant-garde nature of his music and artistic expression. Frank Zappa's childhood was marked by unusual and potentially hazardous exposures, reflecting the scientific and medical practices of the time, which significantly influenced his health and artistic expression. Frank Zappa's father would bring home mercury-filled lab equipment, allowing young Frank to play with it. Zappa recalled spreading liquid mercury across the floor of his bedroom using a hammer, which is a practice that would be considered highly dangerous by modern standards due to mercury's toxicity. Health issues were a constant part of Zappa's early life. He suffered from asthma, earaches, and sinus problems. In a now obsolete medical practice, a doctor treated his sinusitis by inserting a pellet of radium into each of his nostrils. At the time, the long-term dangers of even small amounts of radiation were not well understood. These health challenges and treatments left a lasting impression on Frank Zappa, often reflected in his music and visual art. Nasal imagery and references, for instance, became a recurring theme in his work, and in the collage album covers created by his collaborator, Cal Schenkel. Zappa suspected that his childhood illnesses might have been made worse by exposure to mustard gas from the nearby chemical warfare facility. His health issues seemed to intensify during the time that he lived in Baltimore. In 1952, seeking a healthier environment, the Zappa family moved to Monterey, California, where his father taught metallurgy at the Naval Postgraduate School. They later moved to the San Diego neighborhood of Claremont and then to El Cajon, and eventually returned to San Diego. These experiences, from the unconventional child play with dangerous substances to the frequent relocations and health challenges, contributed to the formation of Zappa's unique perspective on life and art, deeply influencing his creative output. Frank Zappa's formative years were marked by a growing fascination with music, a passion that was nurtured and expanded during his time at Mission Bay High School in San Diego. It was here that he joined his first band, taking on the role of a drummer. This period was crucial in developing his musical talents and interests. Around the same time, Zappa's parents acquired a phonograph, a key moment that significantly broadened his exposure to various music genres and artists. The record player not only allowed him to explore music more deeply, but also enabled him to start building his own collection. His musical tastes were eclectic and wide-ranging, indicative of a deep curiosity and openness to diverse influences. As a teenager, Frank Zappa found himself enthralled by a variety of musical genres. He was drawn to R&B, admiring artists like Johnny Guitar Watson and Guitar Slim. Doo-wop also captured his attention, with groups such as The Channels and The Velvets influencing his musical sensibilities. Importantly, Frank Zappa also developed an interest in modern composers, which included the likes of Stravinsky, Anton Webern, and Edgar Varese. He was particularly intrigued by the intrinsic qualities of sounds, especially those produced by drums and other percussion instruments. This interest led him to acquire a snare drum by the age of 12 and begin learning the basics of orchestral percussion. A pivotal movement in Zappa's musical development occurred when he encountered an article in Look magazine about the Sam Goody record store chain. This article praised the store's inventory, specifically mentioning its sale of a seemingly obscure album, The Complete Works of Edgard Varese, Volume 1. The magazine described it as a weird jumble of drums and other unpleasant sounds. This unconventional description piqued Zappa's curiosity, prompting him to embark on a year-long quest to find this music. When Zappa finally discovered the album, featuring a cover of Varese looking like a mad scientist, he was short on cash. Nevertheless, he managed to persuade the salesman to sell him the record at a discount. This encounter marked the beginning of Zappa's lifelong passion for the works of Varese and other modern classical composers. In addition to his exploration of modern classical music, Zappa also appreciated the Italian classical music that his grandparents listened to, particularly enjoying the arias from Puccini's operas. This blend of modern classical music, traditional Italian opera, and American R&B and percussion sounds formed the eclectic foundation upon which Frank Zappa would build his unique and groundbreaking musical career. In 1956, the Zappa family relocated to Lancaster, a small town situated in the Antelope Valley of the Mojave Desert, known for its aerospace and farming industries, and its proximity to Edwards Air Force Base. This locale would later inspire Frank Zappa's 1973 track, Village of the Sun, where he references Sun Village, a nearby town. During this period, Zappa's musical pursuits often received considerable support from his mother, despite her own preferences. She might not have shared his enthusiasm for the music of Edgard Varese, but her indulgence in her son's passion was evident. For his 15th birthday, she presented Frank with an extraordinary gift, a long-distance call to Varese, who was in New York. However, the eagerly anticipated conversation with Varese didn't occur as planned. At the time of the call, Varese was in Europe, so young Frank ended up speaking with his wife. She encouraged him to try again later and conveyed Varese's appreciation for Frank's interest. In a subsequent letter to Zappa, Varese expressed his gratitude and mentioned his work on a composition titled Deserts. For Zappa, living in the desert town of Lancaster, this connection was particularly exciting and meaningful. Varese extended an invitation to Frank Zappa to visit him in New York, a meeting that unfortunately never went down due to Varese's death in 1965. However, the impact of this interaction on Zappa was profound. During his time at Antelope Valley High School, Frank Zappa's musical journey took several significant turns, shaping his future career and collaborations. It was here that he met Don Glenn Villette, who later became known as Captain Beefheart. Zappa and Don formed a very close friendship, bonded by their shared interest in R&B records. This friendship proved to be influential throughout their respective musical careers. Frank Zappa also started playing drums in a local band called the Blackouts around this time. One of the band members was Euclid James Motorhead Sherwood, who would later join Zappa's band, the Mothers of Invention. Zappa's interest in playing the guitar began to grow, and in 1957 he received his first guitar. His early influences on the instrument were diverse and included artists like Johnny Guitar Watson, Howlin' Wolf, and Clarence Gatemouth Brown. Notably, in the 1970s and 80s, Zappa invited Watson to perform on several of his albums. Frank Zappa had a unique perspective on guitar playing. He considered guitar solos as creating air sculptures. Furthermore, Zappa's influences were not limited to American artists. He was also inspired by Egyptian composer Helene El-Dab, demonstrating his appreciation for international music and its integration into his own work. Frank Zappa's last years in high school marked a big period of growth in his interest in composing and arranging. By his final year, he had progressed to writing, arranging, and even conducting avant-garde performance pieces for the school orchestra. When he graduated in 1958, Zappa demonstrated his gratitude and respect for his musical education by acknowledging two of his music teachers on the sleeve of his 1966 album Freak Out. Even though he had quite the aptitude for music, his experience in high school wasn't the smoothest. For one thing, he attended at least 6 different high schools because his family was relocating frequently. Frank would also get bored in class often, and as a result, he would end up causing distractions in class. After high school, Frank briefly attended Chaffey College in 1959, but only lasted a semester. Frank was just not into the formal education whatsoever, and his outlook on school also influenced decisions regarding his kids' education later on. He chose to take them out of school at around 15 years old and refused to pay for their college education because he was a believer in non-traditional forms of learning. In 1959, Frank Zappa left home and moved to a small apartment in Echo Park, Los Angeles. During this time, he briefly studied private composition with Professor Carl Cohn of Pomona College. It was also during this period that he met Catherine J. Sherman. They moved in together and were subsequently married on December 28, 1960. Frank Zappa briefly worked in advertising as a copywriter, and while it was a short stint, it provided him with valuable insights into the commercial world. This experience likely contributed to his keen interest in the visual presentation of his work. Throughout his career, Zappa was heavily involved in the design of his album covers and directed his own films and videos. In his early efforts to establish a career in music, Frank Zappa explored various avenues, including playing nightclub gigs. He continued to evolve the Blackouts, the band he had been a part of since high school, to perform at these venues. These experiences were crucial in shaping his skills and style as a musician and composer. Zappa's initial forays into professional recording were not through traditional albums or singles, but rather through composing soundtracks for low-budget films. This path proved to be more financially rewarding than his nightclub performances. One of his earliest notable works was the soundtrack for the 1962 film The World's Greatest Sinner, commissioned by actor-producer Timothy Carey. Recorded in 1961, this soundtrack was significant since it contained many themes and musical ideas that Zappa would later revisit and refine in his subsequent records. Another soundtrack project came with the 1965 film Run Home Slow. Interestingly, the recording for this soundtrack was completed in 1963 after the film's production. The commission for this work, however, came much earlier, in 1959, from one of Zappa's former high school teachers. There's speculation that Frank might have begun working on the project even before the film was shot. This connection to his high school teacher underscores the lasting impact of his early education on his career. Portions of the Run Home Slow soundtrack were later made available on the posthumous album The Lost Episodes, released in 1996. In the early 60s, Frank Zappa's career in the music industry began to take shape through his work as a writer and producer for other artists. He frequently collaborated with singer-songwriter Ray Collins and producer Paul Buff, contributing to the burgeoning music scene in Southern California. One of their notable projects was Memories of El Monte, a song recorded by the Penguins. The original group, known for their hit Earth Angel, featured only Cleve Duncan from its original lineup of this recording. Now, Paul Buff owned the small label PAL Recording Studio in Cucamonga, notable for its unique 5-track tape recorder that Buff had built himself. At the time, such multi-track recording capabilities were rare, mostly found only in sophisticated commercial studios. The industry norm for smaller studios was mono or 2-track recording. This advanced tech at Buff's studio provided Zappa with a valuable opportunity to experiment with multi-track recording techniques, which were revolutionary in the music production process. Although none of the recordings from this period achieved significant commercial success, they provided Frank with enough income to finance a concert in 1963, where he staged and recorded his own orchestral music. In a more unconventional display of his creative approach to music, Zappa appeared on Steve Allen's syndicated late-night show in March 1963, where he famously played a bicycle as a musical instrument. Using drumsticks and a bow, he produced a variety of sounds from the bicycle.
Trinidad.
You can also bang on the frame, and if you're lucky enough to have a bicycle that has a squeaking seat, you can squeak the seat up. You put the bow on here. This may be a little bit new to you, but I think that...
It doesn't come up in the ordinary conversation.
Around the same time, Zappa, along with Captain Beefheart, recorded some songs under the name of The Soots. However, these recordings were rejected by Dot Records. But this rejection was not an isolated incident. The Mothers, later known as the Mothers of Invention, Zappa's band, were also turned down by Columbia Records for having no commercial potential. Frank Zappa famously included this criticism on the sleeve of his 1966 album Freak Out. In 1964, during a tumultuous period in his personal life, as his marriage began to unravel, Frank Zappa made a significant shift in his professional life. He moved into the PAL recording studio, a space that would become central to his development as a musician and producer. Immersing himself in his work, Zappa began dedicating long hours, often 12 or more per day, to recording, experimenting with overdubbing, and manipulating audio tape. This intensive work regimen established a pattern that Zappa would maintain for most of his life, reflecting his deep commitment to his craft and his relentless pursuit of musical innovation. Zappa's involvement in film composing during this period gave him the financial means to take over the PAL studio from Paul Buff, who at this time had shifted his focus to working with Art Laboe at Original Sound. When he acquired the studio, Zappa renamed it to Studio Z. This space became a creative hub for him, allowing him the freedom to explore and develop his unique musical ideas. What's interesting about Studio Z is that it wasn't frequently used for recordings by other musicians. It became pretty much a jam space for Zappa and his friends, including James Motorhead Sherwood, who would later join the Mothers of Invention. To financially support himself during this time, Frank Zappa performed in local bars as a guitarist with a power trio named The Mothers, spelled M-U-T-H-E-R-S. In 1965, Frank Zappa faced a significant and challenging incident that would leave a lasting impact on his life and shape his views. A local press article dubbed Zappa the movie king of Cucamonga, which unfortunately led the local police to suspect him of producing porn films. This suspicion culminated in a sting operation that drastically altered the course of Zappa's career. In March of that year, an undercover officer from the Vice Squad approached Zappa, offering him $100, which is roughly equivalent to about $950 nowadays, to create a suggestive audio tape for what was claimed to be a stag party. So Frank, along with a female friend, recorded a faked erotic episode. But when he went to deliver the tape, he was arrested, and the police proceeded to confiscate all recorded material from Studio Z. This incident went public quickly, with the local newspaper, the Daily Report, covering the story and describing the Vice Squad's actions. Zappa was initially charged with conspiracy to commit pornography, a felony. This charge was later reduced, and he was sentenced to 6 months in jail on a misdemeanor charge, of which he served only 10 days. This experience had a huge effect on Zappa, cementing his anti-authoritarian stance and fueling his skepticism toward the establishment. And it wasn't just legal troubles. Frank Zappa also lost a lot of his work, as the police only returned 30 of the 80 hours of tape that they had actually gotten from Studio Z. Financial difficulties followed, leading to Frank's eventual eviction from the studio. Before Studio Z was demolished in 1966, Frank Zappa managed to recover some of his possessions. In April of 1965, another pivotal moment in Zappa's career occurred when Ray Collins, a member of the local R&B band The Soul Giants, invited Frank to join them as a guitarist. This invitation came after a disagreement between Collins and the band's original guitar player. Frank accepted the offer and quickly moved into a position of leadership in the band. He also took on the role as co-lead singer, even though he was a bit reserved about his own vocal ability. Zappa's influence on the band was transformative. He persuaded other members to perform his original music, believing that this might actually increase their chances of getting a record contract. This shift marked the beginning of a new direction for the group, both musically and in terms of their identity. The band, under Zappa's guidance, made their debut at the Broadside Club in Pomona, California. Coincidentally, this gig took place on May 10th, 1965, which was Mother's Day. In recognition of this, the band renamed themselves The Mothers. Their association with manager Herb Cohen helped them to increase their bookings and gradually gain recognition in the LA underground music scene, which was burgeoning at the time. The Mothers' growing reputation caught the attention of Tom Wilson, a leading record producer known for his work with Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel. Tom Wilson was impressed by their performance of Trouble Every Day, a song Frank Zappa wrote about the Watts riots. This encounter led Wilson to sign the Mothers to the Verve division of MGM Records, which is a label that's known for its jazz recordings, but at the time they were also looking to expand into pop and rock. However, there was one particular stipulation that the label had, which is that the band would have to change its name. Verve insisted on a rename because Mother was short for Mother Copulator, a term that, beyond its profane implications, was also slang for a skilled musician. For example, that's Steve Vai. Why, he's a real mother copulator. Of course, copulator being a longer form of a much more common word that we would normally use, but for the sake of running a nice, clean show here, some replacement was necessary. And thus the band officially became the Mothers of Invention, and this signified a bigger change from a small-time R&B group to more of a force of nature when it came to rock. Freak Out, recorded in 1966, was a big milestone in Frank's career, and considered to be a significant moment in the history of rock music. Produced by Tom Wilson and recorded by the Mothers of Invention, augmented with a studio orchestra, Freak Out was groundbreaking for several reasons. Following Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, it was the second rock double album ever released, showcasing an ambitious and expansive approach to the rock album format. Freak Out was also a daring mix of genres and styles, blending R&B, doo-wop, and experimental sound collages. It captured the essence of the freak subculture prevalent in LA at the time, reflecting the city's countercultural and avant-garde movements. Despite Zappa's dissatisfaction with the final product, the album was a radical departure from mainstream rock music and established him as a pioneering and subversive voice in the genre. The album's raw sound was counterbalanced by sophisticated arrangements, which was somewhat of a novelty in rock music at the time. The recording process itself was unconventional. Some musicians were really surprised to see sheet music thrown in front of them, which was definitely not the norm in rock music at the time. The lyrics in the songs of the album were a combination of anti-authoritarian sentiment as well as more conventional love songs. Frank Zappa's dominant role in the creation of Freak Out set a precedent for his recording career. He exerted full control over the arrangements and musical decisions, performing most of the overdubs himself. Wilson, in the meantime, provided a lot of the clout and financial resources needed to carry out the project. However, despite the creative freedoms afforded by Wilson, not everything went to plan. In a 1967 radio interview, Frank Zappa expressed his frustration with the album's final track, Return of the Son of Monster Magnet, which ended up being released in an unfinished state. Intended as a backing track for a more complex composition, MGM refused to allocate additional recording time for its completion. Therefore, Zappa's vision for the track was never fully realized, so it was issued as it was. During the time of recording Freak Out, Zappa's personal life saw significant developments as well. He had moved into a house in Laurel Canyon, a neighborhood in LA known for its popularity with musicians and artists. Pamela Zarabica, a friend who also appeared on the Freak Out album, joined him in the house. The Laurel Canyon house quickly became a hub for the LA music scene, attracting a variety of musicians and groupies. Despite Zappa's well-known disapproval of illicit drug use, his home turned into a meeting and living place for many influential figures of the time. So the environment placed Zappa at the heart of a vibrant musical community, yet it also exposed him to the aspects of the rock lifestyle that he personally opposed. Following a promotional tour for Freak Out, Zappa's life took another significant turn when he met Gail. Their connection was immediate. Gail soon moved into the Laurel Canyon house with him over the summer. Their relationship grew serious, and they got married in 1967 and stayed married until Frank's passing in 1993. They had 4 kids together and built a life that blended personal and professional aspects, with Gail often involved in Frank's music career. Gail's presence provided a stable foundation amid the often tumultuous world of rock music. The Mothers of Invention's second album, Absolutely Free, released in 1967 and produced by Tom Wilson, marked another significant step in Frank Zappa's artistic evolution. It was recorded in November of 1966 and was a testament to Frank's growing confidence and vision as a musician and producer. Absolutely Free showcased extended performances by the Mothers of Invention and highlighted Zappa's unique compositional style, characterized by abrupt rhythmic changes and the fusion of diverse musical elements. Songs like Plastic People, Brown Shoes Don't Make It were emblematic of the album's approach, combining critical lyrics about the hypocrisy and conformity of American society, as well as the counterculture of the 1960s. Zappa's intent was clear. As he put it, we're satirists, and we're out to satirize everything. This approach reflected his desire to challenge societal norms and expectations through his music. Simultaneously, Zappa was working on a more personal project, an album of orchestral works titled Lumpy Gravy. Initially released by Capitol Records in 1967, the album encountered contractual issues and ended up getting pulled from release. Zappa used this setback as an opportunity to radically rework the album, adding newly recorded improvised dialogue. After resolving the contractual problems, a new version of Lumpy Gravy was released by Verve Records in 1968. Lumpy Gravy was an incredibly ambitious musical project, blending orchestral themes, spoken words, and electronic noises using radical audio techniques. It was a monument to John Cage, a composer known for innovative and experimental approaches to music. This album wasn't just a display of Zappa's musical prowess, but also a reflection of his willingness to push the boundaries of conventional music. The Mothers of Invention's residency at the Garrick Theater in New York City in '67 marked a significant period in the band's history and Zappa's career. Their performances at the Garrick Theater, located at 152 Bleecker Street, above the Café Au Go-Go, began as a short-term engagement during Easter of 1967. Due to its success, the booking was extended by the manager, Herb Cohen, ultimately lasting a half a year. This residency prompted Zappa and his wife Gail, along with the Mothers of Invention members, to move to New York. The shows at the Garrick Theater were notable for their unique blend of improvised acts that showcased the individual talents of the band members and the tightly arranged performances of Zappa's music. Frank Zappa directed these performances using hand signals, a testament to his control and vision as a band leader. Guest performers and audience participation became regular features of his shows. In one memorable incident, Zappa invited U.S. Marines from the audience to dismember a large baby doll on stage, an act that was controversial and indicative of Zappa's provocative approach to performance art. In 1967, Frank Zappa also ventured into the world of advertising. Filmmaker Ed Seaman paid him $2,000 to produce music for a Luden's Cough Drops TV commercial. The combination of Zappa's music with Ed's animation resulted in the ad winning a Clio Award for Best Use of Sound. An alternate version of the soundtrack, titled The Big Squeeze, was later released on Zappa's posthumous 1996 album, The Lost Episode. During their time in New York City, interrupted by the band's first European tour, the Mothers of Invention recorded the album We're Only In It for the Money, released in 1968. Produced by Zappa, with Wilson credited as the executive producer, this album's often regarded as the peak of the group's late 60s work. It featured advanced audio editing and production techniques and satirized the hippie and flower power movements. The album included nasal, retentive, calliope music, which sampled surf music from Zappa's Studio Z days, and its cover art parodied the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The cover art was the work of Cal Schenkel, who Zappa met in New York, beginning a lifelong collaboration in which Cal designed covers for many Zappa and Mothers albums. The period was crucial in establishing Zappa's reputation as innovative, provocative, a highly skilled musician and composer, unafraid to challenge cultural and musical norms. The album Cruising with Rubin and the Jets, produced in 1968, was a departure from Zappa's previous work. It consisted of a collection of doo-wop songs, leaving listeners and critics pondering whether it was satire or a tribute. Zappa explained the concept behind the album with a reference to Stravinsky's neoclassical period, stating that just as Stravinsky took classical forms and perverted them, he also wanted to do the same thing with the doo-wop style in the 50s. The album even included a doo-wop rendition of the opening theme from Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, in the song Fountain of Love. In 1967 and 68, Zappa made two notable appearances with the Monkees. In an episode of their TV series titled The Monkees Blow Their Minds, Zappa and Mike Nesmith engaged in a humorous role reversal, with Zappa dressing up as Nesmith and vice versa. This appearance culminated in Zappa destroying a car with a sledgehammer to the tune of Mother People. Zappa also made a cameo in the Monkees movie Head, delivering a quirky line to Davy Jones while leading a cow. Despite the Monkees' more mainstream image, Zappa respected them and even attempted to recruit Mickey Dolenz to join the Mothers, although contractual obligations with RCA, Columbia, Coal Gems prevented this. Zappa also focused on the business aspect of his career during this time. Together with Herb Cohen, he formed Bizarre Records and Straight Records. These labels, distributed by Warner Brothers Records in the U.S., were intended to give Zappa greater creative control and facilitate the production of recordings by other artists. Bizarre Records featured releases by Wildman Fisher, Lenny Bruce, The Mothers, while Straight Records released albums by artists like Captain Beefheart, most notably the double album Trout Mask Replica, Alice Cooper, The Persuasions, and the GTOs. The Mothers' first album on Bizarre Records was Uncle Meat in 1969, which Zappa described as most of the music from the Mothers movie of the same name, which we haven't gotten enough money to finish yet. The film Uncle Meat eventually saw a direct-to-video release in 1987 as a sort of making-of documentary. It included rehearsal and background footage from '68, along with interviews, since principal photography wasn't ever completed. This period of Zappa's career not only highlighted the musical ingenuity, but also his ambition to merge music with other forms of art and entertainment, even through facing financial and logistical challenges. The Mothers of Invention's second European tour, in September and October of '68, marked another significant chapter in the band's history, showcasing their international appeal and growing interest in Frank Zappa's unique musical approach. The tour included a diverse range of venues and events, reflecting the broad spectrum of the band's appeal across Europe. One of the highlights was their performance at the International Essener Songtage at the Gruge Hall in Essen, Germany. This event was known for featuring a wide variety of musical acts and styles, making it a fitting platform for the Mothers of Invention's eclectic music. In addition to the concert in Essen, the tour included a performance at the Tivoli in Copenhagen, Denmark. The Tivoli, with its rich history and cultural significance, provided an illustrious backdrop for the Mothers' innovative music. The tour also involved appearances on several TV programs across Europe, including the popular German show Beat Club. These TV appearances helped to increase the band's visibility and introduce their music to a wider audience. Continuing their tour, the Mothers performed at the prestigious Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, known for its excellent acoustics and storied history in classical music, which provided a stark contrast to the Mothers' avant-garde style. In London, they played at the Royal Festival Hall, a major performing arts venue on the south bank of the Thames. This concert further solidified their reputation in the UK's vibrant music scene. The tour concluded with a performance at the Olympia in Paris, one of the city's most famous music halls, known for hosting a variety of international acts. This European tour not only expanded the Mothers of Invention's international fan base, but also demonstrated the universal appeal of Zappa's music, transcending cultural and linguistic barriers. The variety of venues and programs they engage with during this tour is a testament to the wide-ranging influence and appeal of Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention in the global music scene of the late 1960s. Upon their return to LA in mid-1968, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention found themselves in a period of transition, both in terms of their living situation and career trajectory. The Zappas initially moved into a house on Laurel Canyon Boulevard, a locale famous for its association with numerous musicians and artists. However, they soon relocated to Woodrow Wilson Drive, a residence that would become Frank Zappa's home for the rest of his life. Despite their success in Europe, The Mothers of Invention were facing financial challenges. The band's early records were primarily vocal-oriented, reflecting the popular music trends of the time. However, as Zappa began composing more instrumental music, influenced by jazz and classical styles, they encountered a disconnect with their audiences. The shift in musical direction led to confusion among listeners who were more accustomed to the band's earlier vocal-focused work. Zappa's new compositions, which he referred to as electrical chamber music, represented a significant departure from the band's original sound. This change reflected Zappa's evolving artistic vision and his desire to explore more complex and sophisticated musical forms. However, the audience's failure to fully appreciate this new direction was a source of frustration for Frank. It highlighted the challenges he faced in balancing his artistic ambitions with the commercial expectations of the music industry and the preferences of the listening public. This period marked a crucial point in Zappa's career, underscoring the complexities of being an innovative artist, striving to push the boundaries of popular music while also trying to maintain commercial viability and connect with the audiences. In 1969, the dynamics within the Mothers of Invention were becoming increasingly strained. At this time, the band consisted of 9 members, and Frank Zappa was shouldering the financial burden of the group. He was funding the band through his publishing royalties, regardless of whether they were actively performing or not. This arrangement put a significant strain on Zappa both financially and personally. Late in '69, Frank made the difficult decision to disband the Mothers of Invention. He often cited the financial strain as a primary reason for this decision. However, he also expressed frustration with what he perceived as a lack of diligence and commitment among some of the band members. This move was met with mixed reactions from the band. While some understood the reasons, others felt bitter and saw it as an indication of Zappa's perfectionism and disregard for personal relationships within the group. Additionally, his autocratic style, exemplified by practices such as staying in different hotels from the band, was a source of irritation for some of the band members. Despite the breakup of the band, several members would collaborate with Zappa in future projects. Notably, guitarist and vocalist Lowell George and bassist Roy Estrada went on to form the successful band Little Feat. Zappa, meanwhile, compiled unreleased recordings of the Mothers of Inventions into 2 albums, Burnt Weenie Sandwich and Weasel's Rip My Flesh, both released in 1970. Following the breakup of the Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa embarked on a solo career, releasing the critically acclaimed album Hot Rats in 1969. This album marked a huge shift in Zappa's musical direction, showcasing extended guitar solos for the first time in his recorded work. Hot Rats featured one of Zappa's most enduring compositions, Peaches and Regalia, which would reappear in various forms in his later works. The album included contributions from a range of talented musicians, including violinist Don Sugarcane Harris, drummers John Guerin and Paul Humphrey, multi-instrumentalist Ian Underwood, a former Mothers member, and multi-instrumentalist Shuggy Otis on bass. Captain Beefheart, a longtime collaborator and friend of Zappa, appeared on the album's only vocal track, Willie the Pimp. Hot Rats became particularly popular in England and had a significant influence on the emerging jazz rock fusion genre. This album not only solidified Zappa's reputation as a groundbreaking musician, but also showcased his ability to innovate and excel across various musical styles. In 1970, Frank Zappa's career continued to evolve in unique and unexpected ways, marked by collaborations that extended beyond the realm of rock and roll. One of the most notable collaborations that year was with renowned conductor Zubin Mehta. Zappa and Mehta arranged a concert in May of 1970 where Mehta conducted the Los Angeles Philharmonic, augmented by a rock band. This event was a significant fusion of classical and rock music, reflecting Zappa's continuous pursuit of musical innovation. Zappa composed much of the music for this concert in motel rooms while on tour with the Mothers of Invention. Some of this material was later featured in Zappa's surrealistic film 200 Motels. While the concert itself was successful, Zappa's experience working with a symphony orchestra was less than satisfying. This would become a recurring theme in his career. Frank Zappa often felt that orchestras didn't perform his complex compositions with the level of proficiency that he wanted. Considering the substantial financial investment required for orchestral recordings and concerts. Later in 1970, Zappa reformed the Mothers, mostly dropping the of invention part of the band's name. This new iteration of the band included a mix of musicians from diverse backgrounds, further showcasing Zappa's eclectic approach to music. The lineup featured British drummer Ainsley Dunbar, jazz keyboardist George Duke, and returning member Ian Underwood. They were joined by Jeff Simmons on bass and rhythm guitar, as well as 3 members from the rock band The Turtles, bass player Jim Pons and singers Mark Volman and also Howard Kalin. Due to legal and contractual issues, Volman and Kalin adopted the stage names The Fluorescent Leech and Eddie, or Flo and Eddie. This period in Zappa's career demonstrates his continued experimentation with different musical genres and his efforts to blend them creatively. It also highlights his challenge in working within the confines of traditional music institutions, like symphony orchestras, for example. The new version of the Mothers signaled a fresh direction for Zappa, combining elements of rock, jazz, and more, which would characterize much of his work throughout the 70s. The iteration of the Mothers that Frank Zappa assembled in 1970 made their debut on his solo album Chunga's Revenge, released the same year. This album marked the beginning of a new phase in Zappa's music, characterized by its eclectic mix of rock, jazz, and more experimental sounds. Following Chunga's Revenge, Zappa embarked on an ambitious project, the film 200 Motels. The double album soundtrack for this movie, released in 1971, featured a diverse cast, including the Mothers, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and notable figures such as Ringo Starr and Keith Moon. Filmed over a week at Pinewood Studios outside London, 200 Motels was co-directed by Zappa and Tony Palmer. The production was not without its challenges, as tensions arose between Zappa and several cast and crew members. 200 Motels loosely explored the life of a rock musician on the road. Notably, it was the first feature film shot on videotape and then transferred to 35mm film, which is a technique that allowed for innovative visual effects. However, the film received mixed reviews when it was released. The soundtrack of 200 Motels heavily featured orchestral music, and the project further deepened Zappa's dissatisfaction with the classical music world. This discontent was made worse when a concert scheduled at the Royal Albert Hall after the film's completion was canceled. The venue's representatives objected to some of the lyrics, deeming them obscene. Frank's subsequent lawsuit against the Royal Albert Hall for breach of contract in 1975 ended in his loss. Following the release of 200 Motels, the Mothers went on tour, resulting in 2 live albums, Fillmore East, June 1971, and Just Another Band from LA. The latter album included Billy the Mountain, a 20-minute track that satirized the concept of a rock opera and was set in Southern California. The track was emblematic of the band's theatrical performances, which often used songs to create sketches. These performances were based on scenes from 200 Motels, as well as new scenarios, frequently portraying the band members' experiences and adventures on the road. On December 4th, 1971, Frank Zappa faced the first of 2 major setbacks that significantly impacted his career and personal life. The incident occurred during a Mothers of Invention performance at the Casino de Montreux in Switzerland. In a dramatic turn of events, an audience member set off a flare, which led to a fire that completely destroyed the venue, along with the Mothers' equipment. The damage was extensive, resulting in a loss of $50,000 worth of equipment, or roughly $400,000 in 2023. This event would later gain a place in rock history, as it was immortalized in Deep Purple's iconic 1972 song Smoke on the Water, to guitar players that would be known as 035. Deep Purple was present in the audience that night, and the song recounts the story of the fire and its aftermath. A recording of the incident and its immediate aftermath was captured and eventually released on the bootleg album Swiss Cheese Fire. This recording was later included in Zappa's Beat the Boots 2 box set. Following this devastating event, the Mothers, undeterred, continued their tour. After a week's break, they performed at the Rainbow Theatre in London, using rented equipment. However, tragedy struck again during the encore of this concert. Zappa was pushed off the stage by an audience member, reportedly jealous over his girlfriend's infatuation with Frank. The fall onto the concrete-floored orchestra pit was severe, and the band initially feared that Frank Zappa had been killed. But Zappa survived the fall. However, he sustained serious injuries, including fractures, head trauma, and injuries to his back, leg, and neck. Additionally, his larynx was crushed in the incident, which caused his voice to drop a third after it healed. These back-to-back incidents, between the fire and the fall, were significant setbacks for Zappa, both physically and professionally. They not only caused financial loss and physical harm, but temporarily halted his touring activities, impacting his musical career significantly during this period. The attack at the Rainbow Theater in 1971 had lasting physical consequences for Frank. He was confined to a wheelchair for an extended period, making touring impossible for over half a year. When he returned to the stage in September 1972, Zappa was still wearing a leg brace, had a noticeable limp, and was unable to stand for long durations while performing. He noted that one of his legs had healed shorter than the other, a physical ailment that not only caused him chronic back pain, but also became a reference in later song lyrics, notably in Dancing Fool.
One of my legs is shorter than the other and both my feet's too long.
During Frank's recuperation, the Mothers of Invention found themselves in a state of uncertainty. As a result, many of the band members eventually formed the core of Flo and Eddie's group as they embarked on their own musical ventures. In the midst of this challenging period, in December 1972, the first biography of Zappa, titled No Commercial Potential, was published. Frank was highly critical of the biography, dismissing it as a hastily written, sensationalist work. He pointed out what he considered gross inaccuracies in the book, and criticized David Wally's writing as lacking quality. Frank Zappa's dissatisfaction with the portrayal and details of the book was evident in his remarks that Wally had merely compiled as a series of quotes without due diligence. Despite Frank's objections, No Commercial Potential was republished in updated editions in 1980 and also 1996. These subsequent editions continued to offer insight into Zappa's life and work, though they were met with varying reactions from fans and critics alike, especially considering Frank's own critical view of the initial publication. During his recovery period, between 1971 and 72, Frank Zappa continued to create music, channeling his energies into the production of two jazz-oriented solo LPs, Waka Jawaka and The Grand Wazoo. These albums were recorded while he was unable to tour due to his injuries. Using a mix of session players and former members of the Mothers of Invention, Zappa crafted albums that bore a musical resemblance to his earlier work, Hot Rats, particularly in their emphasis on extended instrumental tracks and expansive soloing. The albums not only showcased Frank's versatility and deep understanding of jazz, but also his ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The use of a floating lineup of musicians allowed him to explore a wide range of jazz styles and compositions, demonstrating his prowess as a composer and band leader in a genre different from his usual rock-oriented work. By late 1972, Frank Zappa recovered sufficiently enough to resume touring. His return to live performance was marked by a series of concerts in September 72 with a 20-piece big band ensemble, referred to as the Grand Wazoo. This large-scale musical endeavor highlighted Frank's ambition and interest in exploring the possibilities of jazz and orchestral arrangements in a live setting. Following the Grand Wazoo concerts, Zappa embarked on a tour with a smaller ensemble known as Petit Wazoo. This scaled-down version of the band toured the U.S. from October to December of 72. The Petit Wazoo, while more modest in size than the Grand Wazoo, continued to reflect Zappa's commitment to musical experimentation and his ability to blend different genres into his unique style. This period in Frank's career illustrates his resilience and determination to continue creating and performing music, despite the physical challenges. Throughout the early to mid-70s, Frank Zappa continued to evolve musically, forming and touring with various smaller groups. These groups featured a rotating lineup of talented musicians, including Ian Underwood, Ruth Underwood, Sal Marquez, Napoleon Murphy Brock, Bruce and Tom Fowler, Chester Thompson, Ralph Humphrey, George Duke, and Jean-Luc Ponty on violin. During this period, Zappa and Cohen's Bizarre and Straight labels were discontinued. In response, they established Discreet Records, distributed by Warner. Zappa maintained a prolific output in the first half of the 1970s. One notable achievement was his solo album, Apostrophe, released in 1974, which reached number 10 on the Billboard Pop Album charts, aided by the hit single Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. Other significant albums from this era include Overnight Sensation, released in 1973, which featured future concert favorites like Dynamo Hum and Montana. The albums Roxy and Elsewhere in 1974 and One Size Fits All in 1975 continued to feature versions of a band still called the Mothers. These albums are notable for their tight renditions of complex jazz fusion songs, such as Inca Roads and Cheetah's Arf, Bebop Tango, and others. The live recording, You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore, Volume 2, which would be released in 1988, effectively captures the essence and excellence of the 1973 to 1975 band. In 1975, Zappa released Bongo Fury, which included live recordings from the Armadillo World headquarters in Austin, Texas. This album was notable for reuniting him with Captain Beefheart for a brief period. Though their relationship had its ups and downs, they were in contact towards the end of Zappa's life. After 1975, Frank Zappa decided to drop the Mothers of Invention name from his bands, signifying a shift in his musical direction, reflecting continuous evolution of his artistic vision. In 1976, Frank Zappa's career and business relationships underwent significant changes. One notable project was his role as producer for Grand Funk Railroad's album Good Singing, Good Playing. This collaboration was an interesting diversion from his usual work, showcasing his versatility and wide-ranging musical interests. The same year marked the end of Zappa's long-standing relationship with his manager, Herb Cohen. The partnership unraveled in May of 1976, leading to legal disputes. The conflict began when Cohen cashed one of Zappa's royalty checks from Warner and kept the money, prompting Frank to file a lawsuit against him. Frank was also displeased with Cohen for signing acts without his approval. Cohen retaliated with a lawsuit against Zappa, which resulted in the freezing of funds that both were expecting from an out-of-court settlement with MGM Verve Records. This settlement, related to the rights to Zappa's early Mothers of Invention recordings, was eventually finalized in mid-77 after 2 years of negotiation. The legal battles with Cohen also affected Zappa's access to his previous recordings. In response, Frank Zappa bypassed Discreet Records and took his personal master copies of the album Zoot Allures from 1976 directly to Warner. Following the split with Cohen, Zappa hired Bennett Glotzer as his new manager. By late 1976, Zappa was increasingly frustrated with Warner Brothers Records over what he perceived as inadequate promotion of his recordings. He was eager to fulfill his contract and move on. In March of 1977, Frank Zappa delivered 4 albums, amounting to 5 full-length LPs, to Warner to complete his contract. These albums mostly contain recordings from 72 to 76. Warner's failure to meet contractual obligations led Zappa to file a multi-million-dollar breach of contract lawsuit. The legal debate was lengthy, but Warner eventually released the 4 disputed albums between 78 and 79, with one of them being released in a censored form. Additionally, in 1977, Zappa prepared a 4-album box set titled Leather and arranged for its distribution through Phonogram Inc. on the Zappa Records label. The box set was scheduled for release on Halloween 1977, but legal action from Warner Brothers forced Zappa to shelve the project. These events in the mid-1970s illustrate the complexities and challenges Zappa faced in the music industry, not just as an artist, but also in his business dealings and relationships with the record labels and management. In December 1977, Frank Zappa made a notable appearance on the Pasadena, California radio station, K-Rock FM, where he played the entire Leather album. In a rebellious move, he encouraged listeners to make tape recordings of the broadcast. Leather was a comprehensive work that integrated many aspects of Zappa's work from the 70s, including heavy rock, orchestral pieces, and complex jazz instrumentals, along with his distinctive guitar solos. The album was eventually released posthumously in 1996. There's still debate among fans and scholars about whether Zappa originally conceived the material as a 4-album set or if this idea develop later during his negotiations with Phonogram. The various lawsuits Zappa faced in the mid-70s, particularly concerning his material under MGM and Warner contracts, meant that for a time his primary source of income was touring. Consequently, he toured extensively from 75 until 77 with a relatively small but mainly rock-oriented setup. The lineup included drummer Terry Bozzio, Napoleon Murphy, Brock, and original Mothers of Invention bassist Roy Estrada. Other musicians during this period included bassist Patrick O'Hearn, singer-guitarist Roy White, and keyboardist-violinist Eddie Jobson. In December 1976, Zappa's prominence in the entertainment industry was further highlighted by his appearance as a featured musical guest on NBC's Saturday Night Live. During this appearance, Zappa performed I'm a Slime with a voiceover by SNL producer Don Pardo, who also introduced Peaches and Regalia. In 1978, Zappa returned to SNL, this time as both host and musical act, and participated in various sketches. Notably, he performed an impromptu collaboration with John Belushi, who appeared as his famous samurai character. This was done during the instrumental piece, The Purple Lagoon. However, Zappa's time on SNL was not without controversy. After his 1978 hosting appearance, he was banned from the show. Producers criticized his performance, claiming he did a disastrous job of hosting. This was reportedly due to tensions between Zappa and the cast and crew in the lead-up to the recording and his apparent disinterest, demonstrated by his remark to the audience about simply reading from cue cards. The Christmas shows performed by Frank Zappa and his band in New York City in 1976 were significant events in his career, showcasing the breadth and diversity of his musical talent. Recordings from these performances were later featured on the album Zappa in New York, 1978, and were also included in the 4-album project Leather. These shows highlighted the versatility of Zappa's music, blending intricate instrumental compositions with his characteristic humor-infused songs. The band for these shows was noteworthy for its inclusion of Ruth Underwood and a horn section featuring accomplished musicians such as Michael and Randy Brecker. This lineup enabled Zappa to explore a wide range of musical styles and complexity. One of the standout compositions performed during these shows was The Black Page. Originally written for the drum kit, Frank later developed the piece for larger bands. The Black Page is renowned for its complexity, particularly in terms of its rhythmic structure and the densely arranged short passages it comprises. This composition exemplifies Zappa's penchant for challenging the norms of musical composition. In contrast to the complexity of The Black Page, the shows also featured more humorous and lighthearted songs, like Titties and Beer. This juxtaposition of complex instrumentals with humorous songs was a hallmark of Zappa's style. Zappa in New York, released in 1978, was characteristic of Zappa's often controversial approach to songwriting, blending humor, social commentary, and explicit content. Like many songs on the album, the Illinois Enema Bandit contained numerous questionable references, which led to objections and offense from some critics. But in response to the criticism, Frank Zappa positioned himself as a journalist, reporting on life as he saw it, highlighting his belief in the importance of artistic freedom and expression. Zappa's stance on this issue predates his later, more publicized fight against censorship in the music industry. During this period, Zappa faced additional challenges with Warner Brothers Records. The remaining albums released by Warner without Zappa's approval were Studio Tan in 1978, Sleep Dirt, and Orchestral Favorites, which were both released in 1979. These releases were largely overlooked, as they received minimal promotion and were overshadowed by the publicity surrounding Zappa's legal disputes with the label. In 1979, Frank Zappa released 2 of his most significant and commercially successful albums, Sheik, Your Booty, and Joe's Garage. These projects not only demonstrated Frank's musical versatility, but also solidified his status as a major figure in the music industry. Sheik, Your Booty, released in March of 1979, was the first album to appear on Zappa Records. It featured the Grammy-nominated single Dancin' Fool, which achieved notable success, reaching number 45 on Billboard. The album also included the controversial song Jewish Princess, which attracted attention from the Anti-Defamation League. The ADL attempted to restrict the song's radio airplay, alleging that its lyrics were anti-Semitic. Zappa firmly denied these accusations, criticizing the ADL for what he perceived as an attempt to create a stereotypical image of Jews that aligned with their interests. The commercial success of Shake Your Booty was also driven by the song Bobby Brown. It had which were deemed very explicit lyrics, leading to the song being shunned by U.S. radio stations. However, Bobby Brown did become a hit in several European countries, where English is not the primary language. The success of both the albums during this period marked a high point in Zappa's career. Joe's Garage was released in 2 parts in 1979 due to economic constraints, and it turned out to be one of Frank Zappa's most ambitious projects. The first part, Joe's Garage Act 1, came out as a single album in September 79, followed by the double album, Joe's Garage Acts 2 and 3, in November of the same year. The rock opera, featuring singer Ike Willis as the lead character, Joe, delves into themes such as dangers of political systems, suppression of freedom of speech and music, and the inspiration for these themes partly came from the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which had made music illegal. The first act includes the song Catholic Girls, seen as a counter to the controversy stirred by Jewish Princess, and the title track, which was released as a single. The latter acts of Joe's Garage are notable for extended guitar solos, which were recorded live and then mixed with studio backing tracks, a process Zappa described as xenochrony. The album is also known for featuring one of Zappa's most renowned guitar pieces, Watermelon in Easter Hay, and eventually all 3 acts would be compiled as a 3-album or 2 CD set. So around this time, Zappa decided it was time for a change, so he had Gail chop his hair in August of 79. That fall, he took some time off, canceled tour plans, and he also completed the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen, UMRK Studios, at his house, which gave him complete freedom in his music endeavors. On December 21st, 1979, Zappa's film Baby Snakes premiered in New York. This movie, tagged as a movie about people who do stuff that is not normal, was based on footage from Zappa's concerts in New York around Halloween 1977. The band for these performances included keyboardist Tommy Mars and percussionist Ed Mann, as well as guitarist Adrian Belew. Additionally, the film featured clay animation sequences by Bruce Bickford, who had previously worked with Zappa on a 1974 TV special. Despite its limited success in theatrical distribution, Baby Snakes won the premier Grand Prix at the first International Music Festival in Paris in 1981, highlighting Zappa's innovative approach to combining music and visual arts. In 1980, Frank Zappa continued to confront and challenge the norms of the music industry, both in his music and business dealings. After a dispute with Phonogram, the distributor that refused to release his song, I Don't Want to Get Drafted, Zappa decided to cut ties with them. Recorded in February 1980, this song reflected Zappa's response to the reinstatement of the selective service system in the U.S. Zappa released the single independently in the U.S., and it was later picked up by CBS Records for international distribution. After a busy year of touring in 1980, Zappa released Tinseltown Rebellion in 1981. This album was the first release on his own label, Barking Pumpkin Records. Tinseltown Rebellion compiled songs from a 1979 tour, 1 studio track, and material from the 1980 tours. This album showcased a mix of intricate instrumentals and Zappa's use of a vocal style that lies between singing and speaking, used notably by composers like Arnold Schoenberg or Alban. The album highlighted some of the most skilled bands Zappa has ever assembled, particularly featuring the talents of drummer Vinnie Colaiuta. While some of Zappa's lyrics on Tinseltown Rebellion continued to stir controversy, with critics labeling them as sexist, the album's political, sociological satire, especially in songs like the title track and The Blue Light, were praised for their sharp critique of American culture and society. The album also marked the introduction of guitarist Steve Vai into Zappa's touring band in late 1980, adding a new dimension to Zappa's already diverse and accomplished musical ensemble. Tinseltown Rebellion exemplified Zappa's continuous exploration of musical boundaries and social commentary. In 1981, Frank Zappa released the double album, You Are What You Is, a work that further cemented his reputation for blending incisive social commentary with his unique musical style. While the album included one complex instrumental piece, theme from the third movement of Sinister Footwear, it primarily consisted of rock songs, featuring Zappa's trademark sardonic commentary. The lyrics satirically targeted a range of subjects, including teenagers, the media, religious figures, and political hypocrisy. Two tracks in particular, Dumb All Over and Heavenly Bank Account, showcased Zappa's critical perspective on religion. These songs were tirades against religious dogma and the exploitation of faith for financial gain, directly targeting TV evangelists like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. Zappa criticized these figures for their perceived influence on U.S. politics and their use of religion as a tool for fundraising. Other songs, such as Society Pages and I'm a Beautiful Guy, reflected Zappa's disillusionment with the Reagan era, particularly its emphasis on materialism and the pursuit of wealth and happiness. Zappa also ventured into the realm of music videos with this album, creating a video for the title track, You Are What You Is. The video was controversial and ultimately banned from MTV. However, it gained later exposure when it was featured in an episode of Beavis and Butthead. You Are What You Is stood out for its critical examination of American culture during the early 1980s, combining Zappa's musical innovation with his keen observations on social and political issues. The album's blend of humor, critique, and musical complexity exemplified Zappa's ongoing commitment to challenging societal norms and conventions through his art. In 1981, Zappa put his guitar front and center with the release of 3 instrumental albums, Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, Shut Up and Play Your Guitar Some More, and The Return of the Son of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. Initially, these albums were only available through mail order, though they were later released through CBS Records. The albums feature mainly live recordings from 79 to 80 and focus solely on Zappa's guitar solos. They showcase his exceptional improvisational abilities and are also notable for the performances of the backing group. Zappa's focus on guitar work continued with the release of another guitar-only album, Guitar, in 1988. Additionally, Transfusion, an album he completed shortly before his death, was released posthumously in 2006. Beyond his musical career, Frank Zappa also explored roles in TV, expanding his presence in popular culture. He appeared as an actor or voice artist in various TV shows, including Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater, Miami Vice, and The Ren and Stimpy Show. There was also a plan for Zappa to have a voice part in The Simpsons, which unfortunately never materialized. In May of 1982, Frank Zappa released the album Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch, which featured the most commercially successful single, Valley Girl. The song, nominated for a Grammy Award, peaked at number 32 on the Billboard charts. Valley Girl was notable for its satirical portrayal of the San Fernando Valley teens with improvised lyrics by Zappa's daughter, Moon Zappa. The song popularized Valley speak expressions like gag me with a spoon, for sure, grody to the max, and barf out, and became a total cultural phenomenon during that time.
Well, like, okay, take this house over here, for example. You notice it's got like a little picket fence. It's so cute. There's like vines growing over everything. I don't know what the flowers are called, but like, they're so awesome.
So it just airheads is what you're saying, pretty much. Yeah.
1983 saw the release of 2 diverse projects by Zappa. The first one, The Man from Utopia, was a rock-oriented album featuring eclectic tracks, including the vocal-led Dangerous Kitchen and the Jazz Discharge Party Hats. The second project, London Symphony Orchestra Volume 1, featured orchestral compositions by Zappa, performed by the London Symphony Orchestra. A follow-up, London Symphony Orchestra Volume 2, was released in 1987. These sessions, funded entirely by Zappa, aided by the success of Valley Girl, were challenging due to the complexity of the music and a very tight schedule. Frank wasn't fully satisfied with the recording. For example, Strictly Gentile required 40 edits to correct out-of-tune notes. Their conductor, Kent Nagano, acknowledged the difficulty of the music, stating that it was humanly very difficult. However, despite the challenges, it did get a lot of praise from critics. In 1984, Zappa collaborated again with Nagano and the Berkeley Symphony Orchestra for a Zappa Affair, a live performance with an augmented orchestra, life-size puppets, and moving stage sets. Though critically acclaimed, the production was a financial failure and was performed only twice. Zappa also made a notable appearance as a keynote speaker at the American Society of University Composers at Ohio State University, where he delivered his Bingo, There Goes Your Tenure address. Additionally, two of his orchestral pieces, Dupree's Paradise and Naval Irrigation in Art, were performed by the Columbus Symphony Orchestra and Pro Musica Chamber Orchestra of Columbus. In 1984, Zappa's management relationship with Bennett Glotzer ended. Starting in '85, his wife Gail took over much of the management of Zappa's business empire, which included a record label, a mail order company, a video company, and a music publishing firm. In the latter part of his career, Frank Zappa's work was significantly influenced by his use of the Synclavier, an early digital synthesizer that revolutionized his approach to composition and performance. Zappa embraced the Synclavier for its precision and ability to replicate complex musical passages with a wide array of synthetic sounds. He appreciated the instrument's capability to simulate various imaginary instruments with remarkable accuracy. Despite its potential to replace musicians, Zappa viewed the Synclavier and live musicians as distinct tools, each with unique qualities and purposes. In 1984, Zappa's exploration of new musical directions was evident in the release of 4 diverse albums. One of these, Boulez Conducts Zappa, The Perfect Stranger, featured orchestral works commissioned by and conducted by the renowned Pierre Boulez, a key influence on Zappa's early work. This album juxtaposed traditional orchestral compositions with premier Synclavier pieces. While Zappa expressed some dissatisfaction with the performance of his orchestral works, which he felt were under-rehearsed, he also acknowledged Boulez's meticulous approach in the album's liner notes. Another 1984 release, Thingfish, was an ambitious 3-record set. It was complex, blending new vocals with previously released tracks and new Synclavier music, showcasing Frank's penchant for blending diverse elements into a cohesive whole. Zappa also released Francesco Zappa in 1984, a unique Synclavier rendition of works by the 18th century composer of the same name. This album further demonstrated Frank's interest in classical music and his willingness to experiment with blending historical compositions with modern technology. These projects from 1984 highlight Frank's continued innovation and ability to integrate cutting-edge tech into the music. During the 80s, Frank Zappa's business ventures expanded beyond his music, with the establishment of Barfco Swill, a mail-order merchandise business. This venture was initiated by his wife Gail in response to the overwhelming amount of fan mail and requests for merchandise that went beyond conventional records. They offered a unique array of Zappa-related products, including t-shirts, videos, posters, sheet music, collector's recordings, many of which were unavailable through other channels. And the rationale behind this, according to Gail Zappa, was that they wanted to be able to break free of reliance on record labels so that they could provide things more directly to the fans themselves. Around 1986, Frank Zappa embarked on an extensive project to re-release his earlier recordings, taking advantage of the emerging digital compact disc medium that was getting big at the time. He personally supervised the remastering of his albums from the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, ensuring that his extensive catalog was accessible in the new format. Some of these reissues were not without controversy. A lot of fans criticized certain aspects of being unfaithful to the original recordings, and the ones that received the most criticism were Only in It for the Money, Cruising with Reuben and the Jets, Uncle Meat, and Sleep Dirt. Interestingly, Zappa had been ahead of his time in envisioning the future of music distribution. Nearly 2 decades before the rise of online music stores, he proposed replacing traditional phonographic record merchandising with direct digital-to-digital transfer via phone or cable TV. This system would have included automated royalty payments and consumer billing. By 1989, Frank considered this innovative idea a miserable flop, perhaps due to the technical limitations of the era. In 1986, Zappa released the album Jazz from Hell, which is a departure from his earlier work, focusing predominantly on compositions created with the Synclavier. This album was critically acclaimed and earned Frank Zappa his first Grammy Award in 1988 for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. Jazz from Hell featured a range of Synclavier-generated compositions, with the exception of one live guitar solo, Saint Etienne. Frank Zappa's final tour with a rock and jazz band took place in 1988 and was notable for its extensive repertoire of over 100 compositions, predominantly Zappa's own works. The tour featured a 12-piece group, but it ended prematurely and under acrimonious circumstances. The tour was documented in several albums, showcasing the diversity of Zappa's musical style and his band's versatility. Broadway the Hard Way featured new material with strong political emphasis. The Best Band You Never Heard in Your Life included Zappa standards and an eclectic mix of cover tunes, including Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. Make a Jazz Noise Here focused on Zappa's more instrumentally complex and jazz-oriented material. And additionally, an album of guitar solos from this tour was posthumously released in 2006 as Transfusion, a follow-up to the Shut Up and Play Your Guitar and Guitar album. Zappa's 1988 tour also contributed to the You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore series, a collection of 6 double CDs compiled by Zappa from unreleased live recordings dating back to the earliest Mothers of Invention recordings from 1965. 2 additional live albums were released in the early 90s, Playground Psychotics in 92, featuring recordings from the early 70s, and that's from the Flo and Eddie era of the Mothers, and Ahead of Their Time, which was released in 93, and that was a complete concert recording of the original Mothers at the Royal Albert Hall in 68, parts of which were used in the Uncle Meat movie. Frank Zappa's final years were marked by his battle with terminal prostate cancer, diagnosed in 1990. The disease, which had developed unnoticed for years, was deemed inoperable by this time of diagnosis.
Over a period of years, I had urinary problems and was examined, and they didn't find it. That's why it came as such a shock to me when they told me that I had it, because I'd had urinary problems for a number of years. You can imagine how irate a person might be when you are informed that, yeah, you got it, and we can't operate on it.
Despite the grim prognosis, Frank Zappa's creative spirit remained undiminished. He focused much of his remaining energy on composing modern orchestral and Synclavier works. One of his significant final projects was Citizen Phase 3, a major Synclavier work that he had begun in the 80s and completed shortly before he passed away in 1993. In 1991, Zappa was honored to be one of 4 featured composers at the Frankfurt Festival in 1992, alongside John Cage, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and Alexander Nafel. The German chamber Ensemble Modern, intrigued by Zappa's music, approached him to play some of his compositions for the event. Despite his illness, Zappa welcomed the ensemble to LA for rehearsals, working on new compositions and arranging older material for their collaboration. Zappa's engagement with the ensemble was not just a professional partnership, but also a personal connection. He got along well with the musicians, leading to successful concerts in Germany and Austria later that year. Additionally, in 1991, Zappa performed in Prague, a moment he described as significant for being the first time he had a reason to play his guitar in 3 years. His appearance in Prague was symbolic, reflecting not only his return to performance after a long hiatus, but also his recognition of the profound changes occurring in Eastern Europe. Zappa encouraged the Czech audience to preserve the uniqueness of their country during this transformative period, embodying his belief in the power of music and cultural identity. His work in his final years, particularly with the Ensemble Modern and his completion of Civilization Phase 3, highlight his role as a visionary composer who continued to push musical boundaries until the end of his life. In September 1992, due to his illness, Zappa was only able to appear at 2 of these concerts. At the first concert, he took to the podium to conduct the opening overture and the final G-Spot Tornado, as well as Food Gathering in Post-Industrial America 1992 and Welcome to the United States. The rest of the program was conducted by Peter Rundle, the ensemble's regular conductor. This appearance was met with overwhelming appreciation from the audience, culminating in a 20-minute standing ovation. The performance of G-Spot Tornado was notably enhanced by the participation of Canadian dancer Louise Lecavier, adding a visual element to Zappa's complex composition. Sadly, this concert marked Zappa's last professional public appearance. The cancer had progressed to the point where, despite finding the event exhilarating, Zappa was in too much pain to fully enjoy it. The concerts with the Ensemble Modern were documented on The Yellow Shark, 1993, Zappa's last album released during his lifetime. This album represents a culmination of Zappa's work with orchestral music. Additionally, some material from the studio rehearsals with the Ensemble Modern were later released on the posthumous album Everything is Healing Nicely in 1999. Frank Zappa passed away from prostate cancer on December 4th, 1993. His death came just 17 days before he would have turned 53, marking the end of a career that spanned over 3 decades and encompassed a wide array of musical genres, including rock, jazz, electronic, orchestral, and avant-garde. His final moments were spent at his home in L.A., surrounded by his wife, Gail, and their children. The day following his passing, a private ceremony was held, and Zappa was laid to rest in an unmarked grave at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. On December 6th, Zappa's family released a statement to the public, announcing his departure in a manner befitting the uniqueness of his character. Quote, "Composer Frank Zappa left for his final tour just before 6 p.m. on Saturday," unquote. Frank Zappa had an unparalleled level of control over every aspect of his business. Boasting an IQ of 172, Frank scored higher than many people considered great thinkers of our time. Frank was also a rebel, but he employed wit and eloquence to get his point across. Frank Zappa's outspoken stance against censorship and his defense of freedom of expression were prominently showcased during his appearance on platforms like CNN's Crossfire, and most notably in his testimony before the U.S. Senate in 1985. Zappa's engagement in these debates highlighted his deep concerns over attempts to regulate and censor music content, particularly through the actions of the PMRC, Parents Music Resource Center, an organization co-founded by Tipper Gore, wife of then-Senator Al Gore. The PMRC, which included wives of several politicians, aimed to address concerns over song lyrics with sexual or satanic content. Zappa criticized the PMRC for what he saw as a conflict of interest due to its founders' relationships with politicians who were actively involved in related legislative efforts. He was particularly critical of the proposed blank tape tax and suggested that the PMRC's activities served as a distraction from legislation that would benefit only a select few within the music industry. Now, the rationale behind the blank tape tax was to charge a little fee for any blank media in order to compensate artists and record labels. It was intended to serve as kind of a royalty payment, but a lot of its opponents argued that it was unfair because people weren't just buying the tapes to copy music. He also characterized the PMRC's proposal for voluntary labeling of records with explicit content as extortion of the music industry. In his Senate testimony, he famously likened their demands to treating dandruff by decapitation, arguing that such measures infringed on civil liberties and posed enforcement challenges. He called it a slippery slope of moral censorship, questioning the potential for future discriminatory labeling based on religious or cultural criteria.
I'd be interested to see what toys your kids ever had.
Why would you be interested?
Just as a point of interest in this.
Well, come on over to the house. I'll show them to you. Really?
I might do that.
His composition, Porn Wars, featured on the album Frank Zappa Meets the Mothers of Prevention, utilized Synclavier music set to excerpts from the PMRC hearings. This piece, along with the full recording released in 2010 as Congress Shall Make No Law, captured Zappa's interactions with Senators Fritz Hollings, Slade Gorton, and Al Gore, encapsulating his resistance to censorship and his advocacy for artistic freedom. Frank Zappa was also a family man. All 4 of his kids are highly successful in their own right. Moon Zappa, Frank Zappa's oldest kid, with his wife Gail, was born on September 28, 1967. She gained early fame for her role in the creation of the hit song Valley Girl alongside her dad, which not only showcased her vocal talent, but also introduced the term Valley Speak. Since then, she's worked as an actress, appearing in several TV shows and films. She's also an author. Her novel America the Beautiful was published in 2001, and beyond acting and writing, she's continued to explore music and has been an advocate for all sorts of social issues. Dweezil Zappa, born on September 5th, 1969, followed the most closely in his dad's footsteps. A talented guitar player, Dweezil's released several albums that span genres from rock to jazz fusion. He's dedicated a significant part of his career to performing his dad's music, initially with the Zappa Plays Zappa tour, which started in 2006. Unfortunately, the tour had to change its name due to a family dispute over the use of the Zappa name. Nevertheless, it's been highly successful, introducing Frank Zappa's complex compositions to new generations. Ahmet Zappa, born on May 15, 1974, has pursued a diverse career in the entertainment industry. Like his siblings, he's worked in music, but his endeavors extend into writing, production, and business. Ahmet co-wrote the novel The Monstrous Memoirs of a Mighty McFearless with Rose McGowan, which was published in 2006, and he's also produced and developed content for film and TV, focusing on projects that have a unique or creative edge. He's also involved in the management of the Zappa Family Trust, overseeing the release of Frank Zappa's posthumous works and managing his legacy. Diva Zappa, the youngest of the Zappa siblings, was born on July 30th, 1979. She's worked as an actress, appearing in several films and TV shows. She's also worked in the visual arts, creating unique pieces that have been featured in exhibitions. Frank Zappa lives on through countless recordings and videos, through the countless musicians he's influenced, to his family who continue his legacy in their own respective ways. Frank Zappa has definitely left his indelible mark on the music world, whether the establishment likes it or not. So if you like what you're seeing, make sure to join the family and subscribe. And while you're at it, if you could kindly hit that like button, I do greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching.